Welcome again to It Doesn't Take a Genius, conversation with introspective perspectives and pithy points of view. Here are your hosts, my friends, Max and Marty.
I think that's Mark and Mike.
Yeah, whatever.
Ramsey!
Marshall, such a pleasure to see you again. And I notice today, for those of you watching the YouTube video, I'm apparently tan. I look downright Californian right now.
Oh, you are a bronze god.
I think I just have lighting issues, but I appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Yes. Because, if the sun comes out from behind a cloud, you could be the palest guy.
Oh, I am the palest guy.
In
That
the
is
history of
100%
pale guys.
right.
So we're at part 2 of our series on dignity.
That's right.
Yesterday, we covered the 10 elements you see before you. And I thought that was pretty powerful. I learned a lot and excited to see what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and I thought I would just show these 10 elements for just the sake of a little bit of a soft restart of the conversation. The idea is, dignity literally means worthiness. So, when you're honoring somebody's dignity, when you're treating them with dignity, you're basically treating them like they count, like they're worth something. And there are all these examples of ways to do that, accepting their identity, treating them fairly, recognizing them, including them, some pretty basic, humanity 101 things. And what we talked about is that, when you honor that dignity, they flourish and you flourish. So today we're going to talk about the flip side of that, of what happens when dignity is violated. So that's where we're headed. And I'll go ahead and put up a little graphic here of some brain scans and of an ER. And the reason I'm doing that, and this is a quote from Donna Hicks, her book on dignity is what we're drawing from for a lot of this material. She says social pain and physical pain share the same neural pathways in the brain. But unlike a physical injury, there are no broken bones, no blood, no obvious sign of a wound. So, the gist is basically that, we can do the brain scans now, and we do know that it turns out your brain treats violations of dignity the same as if it were physical pain. So we could sort of stop right there and just think about, oh yeah, we're hurting people. That's literally what's happening when dignity gets violated. I don't know if that makes you think of anything right away, but that's sort of point one.
Well, yeah. The first thing I thought of was third grade. So in third grade, we had this mantra, right? Sticks and stones might break my bones, but words will never hurt me.
Yeah.
Hey, I think maybe I was led astray.
Right. Right.
My whole childhood was fake.
Yeah, and think about how hard it is to admit to that kind of hurt and pain, right? We've talked about this on our podcast before about just expressing sadness, expressing loss, expressing hurt. It usually comes out as anger. Why does it come out as anger? It's because anger is on top of the sadness. We don't express sadness. We don't express loss, because if you do, what happens?
Right. That's seen as weakness.
You're right. I'm weak now, so I can't admit to that at work. So let's just, hunker our shoulders down and move on. Mm-hmm. But look, I understand some people are still listening to this and saying, that still sounds a little hippy dippy. I mean, kind of grow up and get over yourself. Well, I'd like to bring to mind a quote that you shared with me, not the biggest sports guy in the world, but you shared with me LA Lakers coach Phil Jackson's phenomenal quote here: anger is the enemy of instruction. And I know this is something you've used with your clients, Mike. And I just love this idea that, gosh, when you're hurting and it's put you in that place, like, forget developing. If you want your people to develop, don't send them down this road. Don't violate their dignity, because they literally can't get past this.
Oh yeah. I saw this in action. My daughter was on the high school tennis team, and the coach, incredible coach. Earlier in his career, a player would come off the court after a tough loss, and they'd immediately start talking about, what the player could have done differently, more, better, different, or less, going forward. And he figured out that at that point in the game, they're angry, they're frustrated, they're disappointed. There's all this emotion going on, and none of what he said instructionally was getting through.
Just wasn't sinking in.
Yeah. So now they come off the court. He pats him on the back, says, "Hey, we'll get some water. We'll talk about this later."
Yeah.
And once they're in the proper frame of mind, then we can have that conversation.
Yeah.
And
Boy, that's great.
Yeah, he found that his coaching interactions went so much better.
Well, and you see, I've added a little sentence here. Shame doesn't help either. So, thinking to some of the material Pamela Cole has shared with us, one of our mentors, and just the idea of when your brain is in this place, you're not going to develop, you're not going to grow, you're not going to perform really. So if you want development, performance from your people, don't violate their dignity. That's the gist of this.
Well, one of the things that comes to mind as you're talking is, and I have a lot of managers who do this, is that they think they're going to give instruction through sarcasm.
Right.
And as I'm reading your slide here and thinking, okay, sarcasm, as our good friend Pamela Cole has told us, serves to wound and confuse.
Yeah.
So now I'm wounded and confused, and you expect that somewhere in there learning is taking place.
Yeah.
And so it's not. You can say, "Hey, are you ever going to call another prospect in your life?"
Right.
I'm not thinking, prospecting is a great activity and I should do more of it. All I'm thinking is, you're a jerk and you've embarrassed me in front of my peers. Right. I'm not thinking anything about prospecting, even though that was where you were trying to get me to improve. Right. So yeah, I would add, anger, shame, and sarcasm are not useful tools of instruction, because people are no longer focused on the positive behavior that you're trying to get them to do.
Well, and what you said there is so interesting, because if you flip that around and you got into that employee's head, and they really did share and said, when you say stuff like that, it really embarrasses me in front of my peers. I think that would get through to the average manager. If she realized that that's what she was doing, she'd stop, right? But we don't tend to go there. We don't tend to get vulnerable with each other. And
right. Well, and you'd have to add, right, because the manager would want to hear, what's in it for me. The fact that you were embarrassed, maybe not so important to the manager. Right. Could be, but maybe not. But I was embarrassed and didn't get the message that you were trying to communicate.
Right.
Ooh, right. Well, now that's okay. I need you to hear what I have to say. If that system is not working, it might prompt me to change.
Right.
Explaining why the embarrassment was not a positive factor in behavioral change might help someone to understand. But you're right, we don't have that conversation even to begin with.
Well, I'm going to put up a picture of my youngest, and I guess this was a year or so ago. And she's obviously much bigger than when yesterday we discussed that, she basically, I could palm her skull. She was so tiny as a preemie. But the truth is still the fact that she's very vulnerable. She's helpless by herself, frankly, and needs lots of help and asks for lots of help. And again, a quote from Donna Hicks, vulnerability is where the truth lies. Hicks's point is, she says we ought to be thinking like babies. You'd never consciously harm a baby, right? You just wouldn't do it. And but they're inherently worth something, despite the fact that they're basically helpless, right? Maybe because of the fact that they're helpless. In fact, there's something to that makes them valuable. And she says we ought to just all have signs hanging around our neck, if you will, saying "handle with care." And that's, I'm going to tease that out over the next couple slides, but that the general idea of, vulnerability actually is kind of attractive. It's something that draws us to people in a lot of ways when it's done the right way and when it's treated respectfully when it happens.
Oh, I would agree 100%. It's one of those things that that when we see it in others, we're drawn to it.
Right.
And then when we think about doing it ourselves, we think, nobody wants to see that.
Right. Right.
Like, wait a minute, I find that I respond well to that, but yet I don't see that it would work for me.
Right.
And yeah, people have this incredible ability to rationalize away what they know to be true,
Right.
but they don't want to apply it to themselves.
I think that's spot on. And to your point earlier, so what's in it for the manager? Well, a quote from The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, the book by Patrick Lencioni, that is just, I think it's the best book on teamwork I've ever read. He talks about vulnerability. He says employees who can't trust their leader to be vulnerable are not going to be vulnerable and build trust with one another. So you're going to have to model this kind of behavior. But once you do, you basically have unlocked the building block of trust that teamwork is based on. And sometimes that might just be teamwork with you as their boss, right? Maybe it's not a whole team scenario, but you two being vulnerable with each other, and you're going to have to lead the charge. Whoever's the leader here, right? You're going to have to be the one that goes to vulnerability first, but it gives you this ability to unlock trust between the two of you.
Oh yeah. I had a store owner, and he came into the manager's meeting, and it was amazing. He said, listen, we've got this issue. He says, and I truly don't know what to do. And
I love that.
There are a lot of smart people in this room, and I need your help. And he kind of laid it out, and you could physically see people leaning in towards him. And you could mentally feel like they were leaning in, like, we have to help this guy.
Right.
Got to help this man. He's got a problem and he doesn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And he's the owner, right? He's supposed to be the, if you believe in the old leadership, he's supposed to be the smartest guy in the room.
Right. He's the hero.
Yeah. He's the guy on the mountain pointing their directions.
Right.
And he doesn't know what to do. And instead of finding it like, well, I don't know how he got this job. There was none of that. None of this. Well, he shouldn't have this position. It was, I need to help him.
Yeah.
And they did, and they came up with some amazing ideas, and they implemented one of them, and it worked out fantastically. But for him to start that meeting, it was just so powerful and so true, and got us to such a good place.
Yeah, it's a true moment, and I think it's because it's true that you're really worth something, no matter what. Your worthiness, your value doesn't depend on the opinions of the people in the room. It's true that you're just worth something, and vulnerable people who know that can be vulnerable. I would go ahead and I'm going to put a Bible verse up here, and then I'm going to go to a couple other proofs. But I would go so far as to say that, according to many faith traditions, but I happen to know the Judeo-Christian one, honoring someone's dignity is honoring something bigger than yourself. And this is one you probably heard from Genesis. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created him. So this is a cornerstone of Western civilization, to be able to say people are image bearers of God himself. And so they deserve to be treated with that kind of worthiness built into the equation. So I don't expect a lot of dialogue here, but just, I just want to lay down the fact that, what you said was that moment in the management meeting was true. And that's because it is true that guy had a worthiness to him that went above and beyond whether or not he had the solution to this problem, and whether or not the people saw him as this amazing leader or not. He had some value that he knew of himself, and that allowed him, I suspect, to open up and say, hey, my worthiness is intact. It doesn't depend on this situation or you people. Let me be vulnerable and tell you what's going on. I think that's why this is such a big deal, because it unlocks that potential for yourself.
Oh, definitely. This is such a powerful thought, and to think that it's bigger than any one person.
Right.
Maybe gives people the courage to, try to be better at it.
Yeah. I think that's spot on, and I'm gonna double down on what I said. Now oh, Mike, should I read this whole thing? Will you kill me if I read this whole thing?
No. Homer would be proud if you read from the Iliad.
So I think we think the Iliad, Homer's Iliad, was written or at least compiled in the 800s BC. I think that's right. And it's basically the story of Achilles, who is this sort of the greatest of the Greek warriors at the beginning of the epic. And it's this, it's this huge book of poetry that they could recite from memory back in the day. The legend is Homer was blind. And, all these folks who quoted it could quote big, huge passages of this. This was a foundational document that everybody talked about, the Iliad and the Odyssey, Homer's works. But you start this particular epic 10 years into the siege of Troy. And Achilles, at the beginning of the story, quits. He's their best warrior, and he quits the battle because it's a long story, but his honor and his dignity, you could say, get violated. And he rejoins the battle only after his best friend is killed by this prince of the city of Troy, Hector. And Achilles is so angry and probably so disgusted with himself and embarrassed that he set out the battle and let his best friend take over, that he kills Hector. So Achilles kills the Prince of Troy who killed his best friend. And then just to get as dignity violating as possible, he pulls Hector's corpse behind a chariot, just around and around in circles over and over again. And I think it describes that he pierces leather thongs into his ankles and just tries to abuse the corpse as much as he possibly can. That's what Achilles does to this body. All right, Hector's body. And so what you're reading here to me is the climax of the Iliad, and I'll read it for our audio audience. But it's basically Hector's father, King Priam. He crosses enemy lines to beg for his son's body back from the man who murdered his son. And notice that nothing gets through to Achilles in this story until you get to the connection that both of them understand. So I'll read it, and then we can talk about that connection point, because it applies to everything we're talking about here. So the quote from King Priam is, I come now to the ships to beg his corpse from you, bringing a princely ransom. Respect the gods, Achilles, and show mercy towards me, remembering your own father, for I am more to be pitied than he, since I have brought myself to do what no other man on earth would do. I have lifted to my lips the hand of the man who killed my sons. So all sorts of reasons given there, but he lets loose with this bit saying, remember your own father. I'm more to be pitied than he, since I have actually come to my son's murderer and am kissing his hands and kneeling to him. Well, we know the Achilles story, right? Achilles' heel, right? He was dipped and invincible, except for that one part on his heel, and he knew that he was going to get glory but die young. And so he knew he was going to have his dad bury him, probably, in a sense, right? Or his mom, if you want to say it that way. And so he gets where Priam is coming from here. He gets the idea of having to bury your son. So the next paragraph is, his words had moved Achilles to tears at the thought of his own father, and taking the old man's hands, he set him gently from him, while both were lost in memory. Priam, remembering man-killing Hector, and wept aloud at Achilles' feet, while Achilles wept for his father Peleus, and for Patroclus, who was his friend, once more, and the sound of their lament filled the hut. So finally a breakthrough from these two armies, and it's because the father makes the connection point with the son, the son's killer, saying, we both know what this is like. We both understand this. We have an empathy moment. Despite being mortal enemies, we make that connection. So maybe that's a little lofty for our simple little podcast, but I just love the idea that there is this moment where they make a connection. There's a vulnerability moment because the father is able to make this connection point and say, here's the kind of grief I'm going through, and you get it, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Well, and you hit upon the key word. This may be the ultimate demonstration of empathy,
Right.
where I can truly put myself in your shoes,
Right.
and doing so, it changes how I see the world and how I behave.
Yeah. Perfect.
So yeah, that's incredible.
Well, so with that being said, we've got a list of 10 things that we're going to get to talking about dignity. But I did want to remind people, if you haven't seen it, we've mentioned it before on the podcast, and we'll put a link in the show notes. But Chick-fil-A has this powerful video called "Every Person Has a Story, Every Life Has a Story." And it features, it's a training video for their employees, and it features all of these customers and a couple employees and a manager at a Chick-fil-A, and little bubbles sort of pop up over their shoulder that talk about the story going on the inside of them. And Mike, I don't know if you've had this experience, but I've never, we've used it in the Ford consumer experience movement, and every dealership that I've shown it to, I've never not had somebody cry. At least one person cries.
Oh yeah, and I remember, when I first saw it, that I put it on the shelf for a little while.
Right.
I'll be honest. I was like, okay, this is a cornerstone piece, and I'm like, sure, yeah, I'm gonna set it over here. And because I when you talk about the hyper masculine world of automotive retail, I thought this is not going to go well. And lo and behold, I heard a few stories from other coaches like you, using it with tremendous success, having the conversations that you'd hoped it would spark.
Yeah.
And sure enough, I dusted it off and I tried it, and then lo and behold, it became this cornerstone to people understanding that everyone they deal with, and the Chick-fil-A video, mostly focuses on customers, but
right.
We ended up in the stores talking about that every single person that you work with, that you encounter during the day in the workplace, is going through something that's tough. They're carrying a burden that's huge, and you may not have no idea what it is, but why don't you don't have to know, but why don't you just assume everybody that you meet's going through something, and be nice. We didn't call it dignity back then. We just said, can you just be nice to each other?
Yeah.
And this video made that so poignantly clear. And it's got millions of hits on YouTube. And there's so
everybody connects in some way with the video, because there are so many different stories, happy stories, sad stories, really intense stories, not so intense stories that just keep popping up over shoulders, that there's something that you connect with. And that's sort of the point here, is you've got to have that connection point. So we'll get to that in episode 3. But for now, let's talk about the 10 temptations to violate dignity. And I like to just point out, also called the 10 temptations to focus on self-preservation at the expense of anything else. We all have a little bit in us that says, oh, I might want to be defensive or point blame somewhere else because I'm trying to protect my own ego or my own position at work or whatever it is. So that's a lot of what these temptations are about.
Yes, I remember when Moses came down from the mountain with tablets with the 10 temptations, which later became a great Motown group. So
shame on you.
Yeah. So and as you can see, these are so painful that I'm now deflecting the conversation so that we don't actually get into them.
Right. We've all been there.
Yeah.
Speaking of,
I think it's on the list.
That's right. It is. And taking the bait has another Old Testament reference, an eye for an eye. And just this idea of you let bad behavior of others determine your own behavior. Like he was so bad he made me act bad. But Donna Hicks says, restraint is the better part of dignity. Don't justify returning the harm when someone has harmed you. Do not do unto others as they do unto you. Treat them as you want to be treated, in other words. So a little bit of the golden rule mixed in with the Old Testament there. Don't take the bait.
Right. Well, it goes back to the, two wrongs don't make a right.
Right.
And so, yeah, they stole from you. So no, it's not okay for you to steal something from them.
Right.
Yeah. That's not the way we're going to handle this. Number 2, saving face. Don't lie, cover up, or deceive yourself. Tell the truth about what you have done.
Yeah. So true.
If there are any politicians or would-be politicians, always know that the cover-up is worse than the crime.
That's right.
Yeah, nobody, this is America. Right. You can do some pretty horrible stuff. And if you go out and apologize and own it, they will let you make another movie. They will elect you back to office.
Yeah.
If you cover it up, right, there's a special prosecutor for that.
That's right. And it is really true. The book Leadership and Self-Deception, getting out of the box. The box is the metaphor for that self-deception. And man, when you build it, people know you're in it. I mean, they sense it. So just go ahead and admit. Third one on the list: shirking responsibility. You don't get to say shirking enough in our day and age. When you have violated the dignity of others, admit that you have made a mistake and apologize for hurting them. So just own up to it. Just go ahead and own it.
Yeah, and it's so it's so scary to think about doing, and then it feels so good when you do it.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Because you never know how the conversation's going to go. Listen, hey, in the meeting when I said such and such, that was not called for. That was out of hand, and I apologize.
Yep.
Right? Are they going to explode and go, "You're right. You're a low life bushwhacking, fin flapping," or they're going to go, "Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, that was weighing on my mind."
I had a department head apologize to a department head for blowing his top in front of his people in a meeting. Formally apologize at just in front of everybody. Guess what changed the tone of everything last week? Guess what was the breakthrough? It was him doing that. So it's a huge deal.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Just not only do you own it, but yeah, that you take the extra step of apologizing.
Right.
All right. So here we go. Depending on false dignity, beware of the desire for external recognition of your dignity in the form of approval and praise. If we depend only on others for validation of our worth, we are seeking false dignity. Our dignity also comes from within.
Yeah. And that's back to talking about the image bearer, right? If you're an image bearer of God, there's some inherent dignity. It's in you. So why are you looking at it from the perspective of, I'm not worth anything unless I get praise, unless I get, some sort of status? That's false dignity. The dignity comes from inside. Maintaining false security. Number 5. Is that number 5? I think it's number 5. Don't let your need for connection, and we're back to connection again. We do want connection, but don't let your need for connection compromise your dignity. If we remain in relationship in which our dignity is routinely violated, our need for connection has outweighed our need to maintain our own dignity. And that's a problem, because even personal dignity, you got to protect your own dignity as well. So don't let people abuse you with the intent of, I got to have this relationship. I've got to have these connections. If I don't, I'm not worth something. No, you're not worth something only because you let yourself not be worth something. Protect your dignity.
Yeah, if you're, there's a meme along this line. It says, yeah, if you're seated at a table and the people seated at your table don't respect your dignity, change tables.
Yeah, right.
Like, why are you there?
Right.
Avoiding confrontation. And I had starred this one because this is mine. I don't know about the rest of these, but I own this one.
Okay.
Don't allow someone to violate our dignity without saying something. Stand up for yourself. Don't avoid confrontation. A violation is a signal that there is something in the relationship that needs to change. And I justify part of that is well, I don't want that relationship anymore.
Right.
I go kind of back to the first one and go, I'm leaving. I'm going to find me another table. But yeah, if it's one of these things where you maybe it's a family thing where, yeah, this is the group I have to interact with.
Yeah.
And if that's the case and you can't change tables, then you do have to say, hey, listen, when you do this, right, it creates this feeling, and this is why it's not good, and we need to stop.
Yeah. And Mike, I would say that that's probably the number one theme for how I'm helping people have interventions within an organization, is just the ability to say, here's what I observed and here's how it made me feel. There's the vulnerability moment, right? How I feel about it might be completely wrong. I might have completely misjudged that you were on purpose trying to make fun of me or whatever it is that I personally perceived. But it's true that I felt that way. And so you have to confront, you have to go there and tell the truth about that, or you're violating your own dignity again. You're letting the relationship take higher priority. So claiming innocent victimhood, assuming innocent victimhood. Don't assume you are an innocent victim in a troubled relationship. Open yourself up to the idea that you might be contributing to the problem. You may not be aware of it. We need to be able to look at ourselves from an outside perspective so that we can see ourselves as others see us. And this is the counterpoint to avoiding confrontation, because now we're basically saying, and the confrontation problem might be me, so let me be able to see this from their perspective. Again, it's assuming positive intentions at the same time that you might be going there to have that open and frank conversation about the thing that you need to confront.
Oh, we talk about this all the time in leadership, whether it's empowerment or anything where we're disappointed in our team members' performance.
Right.
And we talked a little bit about this on the last one, right? First thing I need to do is assume that they wanted to do a good job.
Right.
And then the second thing I need to do is figure out, okay, what did I do that contributed to this situation?
Yep. There you go.
And so whether it's a task or a relationship, and then there's this coaching system where you assume 100% responsibility. So I'm going to look at this, and I'm going to look at the current situation between me and this other person and say I'm 100% responsible, and then list all the things that I did to make to take that responsibility.
Yeah, I love that.
And it's never the case, but by taking that extreme view, you sometimes surface some of the things that you could be doing more, better, different, or less,
right,
to make that better.
Right. I love
that. Resisting feedback. I really don't need this one. Don't resist feedback from others. We often don't know what we don't know. And so that goes back to, the Johari window and the blind spot.
Yep.
We all have blind spots, and we need to overcome our self-protective instincts that lead us to resist constructive criticism instead of consider feedback as a growth opportunity.
Yeah.
And we're fond of saying this, right? Well, when we're doing survey unpacks where we're getting feedback on managers and things like that, the very first thing that we say is feedback is a gift.
That's right.
And I'm about to give you this gift, and it's going to smack you around a little.
Right. That's right.
And then, the concept of a friend will tell you what you want to hear. A great friend will tell you what you need to hear.
That's right.
And so this is that example of a great friend, right? If I'm getting this feedback, and the only way I can continue to receive feedback is not attack the messenger.
That's right. That's right. It's the Jewish proverb, faithful are the wounds of a friend, right? And hey, this person may not even be a friend, but if they're telling you the truth, if they're giving you some feedback, that's data, that's information you can take and run with if you so choose. So big deal. Related to that, blaming and shaming others. Maybe you don't just resist feedback, maybe you actively throw it back at the other person or somebody else. And basically the idea is, don't do that. Don't blame and shame others in order to deflect your guilt. Control that urge to defend yourself by trying to make others look bad. We've sort of been talking about that this whole time. It's just so tempting to throw that back. Don't do that. Just own it.
Oh, definitely. And then there's gossiping and promoting false intimacy. Beware of the tendency to connect with others by gossiping about someone else. Being critical and judgmental about others when they are not present can feel like a bonding experience and make for engaging and fun and interesting conversation, but it's harmful and undignified. I guess first time we talk about dignity all this time. It's the first time we've said the word undignified. So,
Right.
Yeah, and we all know the rules about this, right?
Yeah.
If I'm gossiping with you about somebody, then when we separate, that person's thinking, well, who are they gossiping about me to?
Right.
Uh,
Right.
You know,
And what's harder to do is to be vulnerable, right? About yourself. It's easy to be vulnerable about somebody else, right? Because there's no vulnerability there. Let's talk about their warts under their kimono, but I'm not going to open up my kimono. That'd be dangerous. Well, so when you're trying to build intimacy with somebody, instead of talking about the third party, talk about yourself. Invite them to do the same. And there's that is a vulnerability moment that honors the dignity of both sides. It's the opposite of undignified, right? But you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to take this step of vulnerability that leads to connection. Again, we're at the end of this episode. In episode 3 of this series, we're going to talk about what exactly does that look like? What do you do? So we want to leave you with this thought: which temptation to violate dignity is your biggest opportunity to address? So as you have heard this whole series, maybe one of these has really resonated with you in the first episode, saying, I don't do that. And maybe one of these temptations, like you said, Mike, on one of these, it's like, that's the one I own. Which one would you pick out as your opportunity? And then episode 3, we're going to talk about some things you can do to address that and take advantage of that opportunity.
Oh yeah, and as we know from any type of problem solving or improvement process that we undergo, the first step is to name it.
That's right.
Clearly identify the problem.
That's right.
And so that's kind of the step we're asking here, is for you to just, we've given you some verbiage, some language to describe what these things are. And I think everyone innately knows what these are, but now we've given you specific language for it so that you can now name it, own it, and then tune in for part 3, where we talk about, okay, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, perfect. All right. I think it's time for Mr. Dignity himself, John Wolfe, to take us home.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. When I think of dignity role models.
And there you have it. Another session of contemporaneous extemporizing from Mark and Mike. I know it's redundant, but consider who we're talking about. As always, feel free to share the ideas you heard here. No rights are reserved, no permissions needed. Thanks. See you next time on It Doesn't Take a Genius.
That's good enough.